Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Rainer and this is Rainierbooks. Guten Tag, herzlich willkommen. Today I'm gonna give you my first actual wrap-up, monthly wrap-up, which I will start from this month, July, or August as it is today, because I have seen that single reviews are not quite popular, and I think lots of the books that I want to discuss, that I want to bring to you, get a little bit lost when I do single reviews. So I will continue doing single reviews, but not as extensively as I've done it before. So I will pick certain books for getting their single reviews, and I will give you a monthly wrap-up of all the books that I've read over a month. And so why not, let's get started today. I've read 8 books over the course of July, and this was, for me, it's quite a good number because my goal was to read 52 books over the course of the year 2020, and 8 books is almost double the quota that I have to fulfill every month to reach my 52 books. The first book that I finished in July was a nonfiction book that was Masha Gessen's book, Surviving Autocracy. And Masha Gessen is a non-binary journalist and historian who has written an amazing account called The Future is History, how totalitarianism reclaimed Russia, and won the National Book Award for this book in 2017, I think. And they have written their new book, Surviving Autocracy, over the course of the early months of 2020. And this book is in 3 parts a warning, I would say, to America and to the United States and to the people of the United States. It shows how slowly the path to autocracy is paved and how it is very, very intentionally done so, showing how the Trump administration has eroded institutions, because, you know, in the beginning everybody said there are checks and balances, we don't have to be afraid for anything. But if you erode the institutions, if the institutions get less and less trust by the people, and if the heads of those institutions are replaced by people who are serving the autocrat, then it's going to be very difficult. And of course, one of the major chapter, I think, in this book is Us and Them. It's the last chapter that Masha has called Who is Us, where they try to define or try to show how Donald Trump has divided this country even more. And let me read you a short little passage of this really brilliant book that I think is very important for everyone to read ahead of the 2020 elections. It's about reversing the attempt. To reverse Trump's autocratic attempt, we will have to abandon the idea of returning to an imaginary pre-Trump normalcy when American institutions functioned as they should. Instead, we have to recall that what undergirds the Congress and the courts, the media and civil society is the belief that this can be a country of all its people. Moral aspirations forms the foundation of these institutions. Yes, moral aspiration has been used as a cover for hypocrisy and a justification for violence, but it is moral aspiration nonetheless. It will now need to be reinvented. The reinvention is likely a job for the people who are the opposites of Trump in every way, political figures of powerful moral authority that comes in part from lives lived outside Trump's circle of us, like the late Elijah Cummings or the ailing John Lewis, but also the women of the squad. A through and through brilliant thinker. Highly recommend it. The second book I read in July was, it's a debut novel by Melissa and Peterson, and it's called Vera Violet. Vera Violet. It's an amazing, I wouldn't call it thriller. It's an amazing, is it a young adult novel? No, I don't think so. The protagonist is an 18-year-old young woman by the name of Vera Violet, and she grows up in a lumber town in Washington State in the Pacific Northwest in a time when when the golden days are over already in those lumber towns, because logging has been reduced immensely due to overlogging through many, many decades. It's almost impossible now to find the beautiful Douglas fir trees that have been like a symbol for the Pacific Northwest. It's very difficult to find those trees anymore. And actually, I had a short communication with Melissa and Peterson, or Mel as she calls herself, on Twitter, and she told me that in order to show her little son a Douglas fir that was 20 years ago everywhere, she had to travel up a long way up in the mountains of Washington State to show her little son a Douglas fir. This is a novel about a bunch of teenagers, a bunch of young adults in the Pacific Northwest who struggle. Their parents are very often people who have lost their jobs, who have no real direction in life. They are living a life of drugs and alcohol and abuse and violence. And a murder happens in this town, and lots of things happen. Several other things happen that really change the lives of this group of teenagers dramatically. And Vera Violet is forced to leave Washington State, and she's going to St. Louis to work in a preschool for Afro-American children. This is a very interesting debut. It's full of fever, full of energy, and full of power. Let me read you a short paragraph here of this novel, I think. Students from the State College poured salt in open wounds. They spit on our father's work trucks and protested a century too late. They didn't see the difference between loggers and the multi-million-dollar corporations. Thousands of men and women were out of work. The students didn't understand. They didn't know the children who waited in cabins without electricity and trailers without toilets. They didn't see the rotten vegetables of food bank food on scarred wooden tables, or the long drives into town in rusty, rickety vehicles. They fought to protest the northern spotted owl, an old grove timber that was mostly already gone, that accounted for little of the logging company's profits. Their parents paid their bills. They used the big words they learned in classrooms. I furiously wondered how they could think they were so much better than us. This is also about the great differences in the Pacific Northwest when you see those logging towns who are already lost, who have lost their main line of work, and the booming towns like the booming town of Seattle, for example, in Washington State, where big companies like Amazon and Starbucks and Microsoft have emerged, and people pay high rents and drink all sorts of beautiful kombucha and coffee and whatever. So this is Vera Violet, a very gripping debut novel. Well, let me take a sip of tea here in my beautiful little corner. Thank you. What are we willing to sacrifice for love could be the headline under which you could discuss the novel Home Fire by Kamila Shamsie, which was the third book that I read in July. On the one side we have Isma, Anika and Parvais. On the other hand we have Iman and his father. And all of them have Pakistani background in Pakistan. Iman's father is the Home Secretary of the United Kingdom, which is the Minister of the Interior. He's a conservative politician, a career politician who has worked his way up in the hierarchy and who is very strict and very rigid on Islamic terrorism and on Islamic extremism. And he wants to become the Prime Minister, somebody says in the novel. On the other hand, we have the family of Isma and her siblings, her twin siblings, Parvais and Anika. They have been victimized. They have been, because their mother died when they were very young, and their father died on his way to Guantanamo. He was a suspected terrorist, and on the way to Guantanamo, the father died. So Isma was sort of the mother for her younger siblings, and she helped them grow up. And when they had grown up and they were 18, 19 years old, she left, and she could, for the first time in her life, follow her own path. And she went to the United States to study in Amherst, Massachusetts. So what happens is that Eamon, the son of the Home Secretary, is traveling around the world. He doesn't know what to do with his life. He meets Isma, and a circle begins, a story begins that brings these families together. And in the end, it's a very dramatic end. Really, the question is being asked, or you could ask the question, what are we willing to do, sacrifice for the ones that we love? An amazing story, a powerful story, and I really, really loved the way Kamila Shamsie created her characters. Not every character was as strong, but I think that the description of the two siblings is very good, and even the Home Secretary and his way of thinking, and that he wants to make, he wants to work his way up, and what he has to sacrifice for that. He's not a very sympathetic guy, that I can tell you, but yeah, it's a great story of two families and of people who struggle with their backgrounds and who struggle with their present as well. The third book that I read in July was almost parallel to Kamila Shamsie's Home Fire, was Our House by Louise Candlish, and that novel really didn't get to me in any case. Home, family, marriage, everything has its price. This is a story of a woman. Her name is Fiona. She comes home to her house in London just to realize that her house apparently has been sold and that another family is moving in. That's like a nightmare, isn't it? And then we learn about the background, that Fiona and her husband Bram, they are about to divorce, but they are still living together in that house for the sake of the young children, so the young children are able to live in their house. And Bram, the husband, has sold the house to other people, and he has disappeared for some reasons. And all these, the story gets sort of told from different perspectives. We have Fiona telling her story in a podcast forum, and we have Bram telling his story in some sort of long suicide note that he is writing in a hotel in Switzerland. I didn't get connected to the characters, not to Bram, not to Fiona. I didn't like the way Louise Candlish wrote the story, so this was no book for me. This was no Rainier book. Then I had another very good reading experience by reading Graham Swift's current novel, Here We Are. And I have raved about the beautiful cover of this book. Still the book with the most beautiful cover that I have bought this year. Here We Are is the story of a love triangle of Ronnie, Evie and Jack in summer in Brighton in the year of 1959. Ronnie is a magician. He is performing on the Brighton Palace Pier together with his assistant Evie. They are being called, their artist names are Pablo and Eve. And Jack is the conferencier of the show. At the time of the 1950s, 1960s even, the Brighton Pier was one of the main entertaining, what was a major palace for entertaining, the Brighton Palace Pier. Today it's still very nice to visit the pier, but in 1959 it was a time when big shows were performed there, and we have this magician show. We have the story of Ronnie in this novel. Ronnie, who is a child of a very poor mother, who was a charwoman in London during the war. And when Ronnie is a little boy, he's like 8 years old, he gets sent to the countryside because London is bombed by the Nazis, and many children were evacuated, and Ronnie is one of them. And this is a very beautiful part of the novel when Graham Swift describes how Ronnie is growing up there, and he meets his sort of stepfather or his foster father for a couple of years. And Ronnie meets his the relationship of Ronnie to his foster parents there in this mansion that he's living for a couple of years, and his foster father is a magician, and so that's the way he himself becomes a magician later on. Ronnie and Evie, his assistant, they are engaged and they are supposed to get married during the summer of 1959. But then something happens and the relationship of Ronnie and Evie breaks up. And 50 years later, Evie is sitting in front of a mirror and she is preparing for a dinner with a friend, and she is reminiscing the time of 1959 and the decisions that people have made, that she has made, that have absolutely determined the rest of her life. And this is a very beautiful novel. I love the way Graham Swift wrote it in a very light, breezy, beautiful way. And I actually come to think of a song that goes like, the summer wind came blowing from across the sea, that lingered there to touch your hair and walk with me. Yeah, that's the summer wind, and this is like the summer wind. This is like the song. The book reminded me very much of the song by Frank Sinatra. A little bit nostalgia and a little bit melancholy in that novel. The sixth book that I finished in July was Fair Warning by Michael Connelly. Michael Connelly is one of my favorite thriller authors, mostly writing, I think exclusively writing about the city of Los Angeles, and having different protagonists in his four protagonists in his 33 novels. And Fair Warning is his 33rd novel, and it's probably selling like butter, as we say here in Sweden, or like bread in Germany. Fair Warning is the story of Jack McAvoy, a reporter that shows up for the third time in a novel by Michael Connelly. We had The Poet, we had The Scarecrow, and now Fair Warning with Jack McAvoy. He's a reporter now in his 50s, and he is working for a consumer magazine called Fair Warning, when suddenly the police visits him because a woman that he has had a very short love affair with a year ago has been found dead. And she has been killed in a very special way. Her head has been twitched with 180 degrees, and horrible death. And Jack is innocent, but he, of course, as a former crime reporter, he is directly interested in trying to get involved in the case and writing about the case, reporting the case. And he finds out that several women have been killed over the United States. He is very soon in the hunt of a serial killer. And this is a very exciting, very fast-paced, quick novel that I like to read through in 2 or 3 days, in a couple of hours. But nevertheless, I think that Michael Connelly has had a lot of serial killers now in his work, and I'm getting a little bit tired of serial killers. And I know they attract a lot of readers, but maybe it's a little too much. But I like the novel, and I would recommend it if you're looking for something to read in 5, 6, 7 hours, and you are looking for a book that gets you inside of it within 10, 15 pages of reading. And that's really what Michael Connelly is a master of doing. So then I listened to something that I have made a video about that is going to be published, going to be released, I think, tomorrow. This is Ibram X. Kendi's book, Stand from the Beginning. It is an account of racism in the United States, and it is a very complex book with 500, 600 pages. I think it took about 15 hours to listen to it, and I listened to it on my walks that I do during the Corona crisis every day. And it's an amazing book that is almost like an encyclopedia of racism, where in the beginning it is connected to 5 biographies of United States of people, 5 American biographies. The first one is Cotton Mather, the Puritan, who was very influential, and the last one is Angela Davis. Kendi describes really from the beginning how racism was instigated, how racism was introduced, and how it was made systemic in the system of the United States, in not only in the political system but everywhere in the institutions, how racism got institutionalized. And he also teaches us in this book how in popular culture racism was used as a means of creating this us and them, and creating this superior white and the inferior black person, which is really disgusting when you look back on it, at the Tarzan movies, at the Planet of Apes, at other popular culture stuff that we have consumed when we grew up in the 60s and 70s and 80s. Very important book, but it also shows that that it's very difficult to get out of this, because what Kendi actually says is that racism is something that is deeply economic as well, because we have a very small power elite of power, people who have the power in the country, not necessarily politicians, but billionaires. But also billionaires who want to keep it like that in order to gain a maximum of revenue, because they really live from this division. And he proves that very much, and Kendi also says that the only thing to change is not education, but it is to change the people who are up there, who are in this elite, to have people in power who are definitely anti-racist. The last book that I read in July was Kim Jiyoung, born in 1982 by Cho Nam-yo. The blurb is perfectly describing this book. Kim Jiyoung is a girl born to a mother whose in-laws wanted a boy. Kim Jiyoung is a sister made to share a room while her brother gets one of his own. Kim Jiyoung is a daughter whose father blames her when she is harassed late at night. Kim Jiyoung is a model employee who gets overlooked for promotion. Kim Jiyoung is a wife who gives up her career and independence for a life of domesticity. Kim Jiyoung has acted strangely recently. Kim Jiyoung is depressed. Kim Jiyoung is sad. Kim Jiyoung is mad. Kim Jiyoung is her own woman. Kim Jiyoung is every woman. And when this book appeared in 2016 in South Korea and sold 1 million copies, it was also met with a rage of fury by lots of people who saw this as inappropriate, saw this as endangering the classical role model of the Korean society. And there were thousands and thousands of hate posts on social media against the book and against people who promoted the book. That's really incredible, and it's something that we can't imagine that easily. But it's a powerful book. It's easy written prose, like a report almost, with footnotes in order to prove the facts that Cho Nam-yo, the author, is presenting here about the situation of women in South Korea. But it's nevertheless a very readable and very interesting book, because it shows us a lot about a part of the world that many of us don't know so much about. These were all the 8 books that I read in July. I hope that you liked some of them. Drop a comment below if you have read one of them and if you are having any opinions about it. And have a great day wherever you are. Thank you very much for watching. Bye bye.